Hello friends and welcome. I'm Sarah Liz and today I have 3 fun ways to add sentiments to your cards that you may not have tried before. And actually there's a bonus 4th way at the very end, so be sure to stick around. We're starting with this technique. We're going to create a little see-through sentiment using some acetate and of course one of our emergency card kits, but we will do some stamping in this one because I know many of you have lots of stamps that need some use. And so this is the Cozy Waddles die set from Spellbinders. It's so stinking cute. It's part of the Merry Mischief collection and it comes with 3 stamps. Like those aren't purchased separately. It comes with the die set. There are 4 different critter sets, although I guess one is Santa, but he's kind of a critter, and they all come with stamps. So we will stamp on some of the other cards, but for now, I'm just assembling this. A penguin die set is always like my go-to if I'm looking for a quick card because there's never a whole lot to it, whether I'm coloring those penguins or I'm layering up the die cuts, right? Like I'm gonna add some noses and some feet. I love that the feet are connected, so I know exactly how far they need to be tucked back behind there or how far apart they should be spaced. And then our little noses on these are just going to go right where the black sort of dips down between the white pieces. I wasn't sure how to put this scarf together at first, but there's some debossed detail on that far left end, so you can see how it lines up with the bigger piece of the scarf. But here's our little die cut piece, and we're going to add him onto our card base. This is right now a little bigger than A2, so I can decide once I've sort of cut and embossed exactly where I want it to go. And I'm cutting out a 1 3/4 inch circle. Then I'm going to add a little bit of moisture and I'm going to run this through an embossing folder. This is the Season Sparkles 3D folder and it's from that same collection, but any embossing folder would work. I want to make sure that I die cut first and then emboss. Otherwise, when I go to cut it out, I'm going to end up sort of squashing out all of that really great texture and detail in there. And then I just want a little ombre of color. I want that ink to bring out the texture and pattern a little bit. And so I have chosen my darkest purple ink in this sort of color family. But because I'm using a large fluffy blending brush, I'm able to work from very dark at the bottom and sort of fade into nothing as I work my way up. Then I'm grabbing the Sparkle Splatter effects. It's just like a clear see-through but kind of glittery sparkle. And it's like a nail polish bottle, and then I tap the bottle onto the brush and I get these tiny lovely splatters. So I printed the cute holiday sentiments. This is page 2 from the kit, so I have no printed circle around it. And I printed that with my laser printer onto acetate. If you don't have a laser printer, you could get that done at like a FedEx. It's not called Kinko's. I want to call it FedEx Kinko's or the UPS store, and they can help you set that up. But that way I can just sort of trim widely around it, and this is going to fit perfectly behind our circle. I want to be able to see all the way into the inside of the card, and so now I have my card base and I am just tracing the circle onto the card base. If I hadn't embossed it yet, then I probably would have just tried to cut through both layers at the same time, but I have, and so I just traced it and then I cut it out, and that's going to work just fine. To add my acetate into that opening, I am going to use some dry adhesive. I could use wet adhesive, but then I have to wait for it to dry, and I don't have time for that. I was trying to make 4 cards between getting home from teaching and picking my kids up from school, and we made it, but just barely. Once I remove the backing paper, I'm going to pick up the purple piece and try to center it over my sentiment. This is a standard emergency sentiment in a circle size. So 1 3/4 inch, I release them in that size all the time if you're looking for extra freebie sentiments. This particular kit has a bunch of like penguin, Santa, bear. Last year when the Spellbinders clubs released like the polar bear and then the penguin who was on top of him and the cozy toes slippers, that's when I released that kit. And so it pairs really, really well with our winter critters and sort of holiday themes. I wanted a little sparkle on my card base, but I didn't want to have to add another layer and cut through another circle layer. So I just used a shimmer pen from scrapbook.com. I go around the outside, and then I've got some fancy cardstock back there. I'm going to add that double-sided tape again around my sentiment. Is that necessary? Not necessarily, but it will keep it glued a little flatter to the card base. I have added a little bit of wet glue too. I want some wiggle room. Trying to line up those 2 circles and keep my borders even is easier if it's got a little float time. So I did that and it turned out beautifully, if I do say so myself. On the inside, I'm going to add some white shimmer cardstock. I can write my message right on there, but then it also makes it easier to read the sentiment since it is printed in black. We have 2 more pieces to finish this card. You guys, it's not that hard to bulk produce something like this, maybe with different critters here and there for some variety. But I love this one and I think it's got a fun wow factor. So I am stacking together a 2-inch circle and a 1 3/4 inch circle. I love the Spellbinders ones because they nearly touch. It's easier for me to get that circle the same width all the way around. And when I do that, I get this little frame that is perfect to go around the outside edge. It just makes that stand out and pop and feel a little more finished. But here is card number 1, technique number 1. We have our lovely see-through sentiment. I just think it's so much fun. For card number 2, we're going to create this great slider element. I promise it's pretty straightforward, and it will switch up our sentiment when we pull it. So there are 3 stamps that come in this set, and we're going to use those for our sentiments. This die set is called Deck the Paws, and so we have our little puppy, and he's got this tree that he's wearing, and the star is like a hat sort of situation. Spellbinders has some of my favorite dogs, and if you follow the emergency card kit series on my channel, I just released a giant kit full of like sentiments and pattern paper that is dog themed. But Spellbinders has Woofer Treat, which is like the same dog, I think, dressed up as a ghost. They have Roller Disco Dottie, and then a handful of others. I might make you like a little link to click on just to see all the dog stuff from Spellbinders. They're so cute. But I am just very quickly assembling this little guy. I don't think there's anything particularly complicated about him. And I love that they've been very thoughtful in the pieces that they've included. So there is a die that cuts out the little sort of black scrap of cardstock that you put behind the eyes. Would it be easy enough to cut that out? Yes. Would I have to trim it 3 times to get it right? Also, yes. So I've kept this pretty simple. I think you could do this dog in lots of sort of color ways. But we're going for sort of a cream colored dog with his brown muzzle. And then I found I liked the star down so it almost touches the tree. That way the ears don't look like they're so high above the rest of the head. We do also then have some little lights we can add on there. So there's 2 strands. Maybe you could repurpose that 3rd strand to use it twice, but this fills it really, really nicely. There is 1 die that cuts out all of the lights that you need, but I cut it 3 times so I would have it in different colors. I have red, I have a fairly bright pink, and then I have pale blue. This is one of my favorite holiday color palettes, just period. I don't know what it is about it. For our background, we're starting with some pattern paper. That is in a huge 41-page freebie that's part of the Art of Handmade Summit. It's a free ticket summit. So I'll link to the free ticket below if you're looking for that kit. And I thought, is it possible for me to hot foil on top of that pattern paper? Part of my concern was that that paper is like a matte photo paper. It's not regular cardstock, but this worked brilliantly. So I have that printed paper from my inkjet printer, and then this opal foil leaves like a little iridescence, and it's in that lovely peppermint twist sort of Betterpress pattern that I love so much. To create a space for our sentiment, I'm using the Speech Bubbles dies, but you could use any sort of small nested die that's big enough for your sentiment. You don't need this die set for this technique. I am lining it up. I'm making sure there's room for my dog and my sentiment, but I need to make sure my sentiment is low enough that the other sentiment can hide above it, and that when I pull it down, the original sentiment will then be hidden totally below. So basically, I need double the space that is created by the die. So I'm just sort of holding my stamps over top of it and making sure the layout is going to work. Once I get to where I'm pretty happy with it and I like the layout, I'm going to go ahead and tape that down. I don't want it to move. And I put mine a little bit at an angle. It doesn't need to be straight up and down. Okay. Then I have a piece of cardstock, white cardstock, that's about 3.5 inches wide. And I'm tucking both of them all the way up into the corner. I like that the 2 edges meet. It's going to make it a little bit easier to keep everything lined up while I'm doing my stamping. I put one of my stamps just in that open space, and I'm going to bring in my ink and just stamp that in some black pigment ink. So I get a nice crisp black image. It says deck the paws with love and lights, which I think is super cute. I brought in some scratch paper to just press against that pigment ink. It doesn't dry immediately, and that helps it go a little faster to remove any excess ink. And then I'm going to slide that white piece down, but notice the card is still all the way up in the corner, and that white piece is still flush against the right-hand side of my MISTI, and that helps to keep them neatly lined up. The second sentiment says Merry Christmas to you and your pack, and it also fits beautifully right in that space. I'll stamp it twice to make it nice, and then we can go ahead and start assembling the mechanism. This is pretty simple. I need room to put some foam tape on the very right edge of my card. So I trimmed off a little over 1/8 of an inch, okay? Then I'm going to trim this piece down to 4 1/4. Remember, when it was in the corner of my MISTI, all the way up in that right-hand corner, that's when we stamped our first sentiment. I want to create a little notch to pull this out, so I've lined up the second sentiment, so I sort of pulled it down so I can make sure I get that notch centered, and then I just used a punch, but you could use a die instead. It's not a big deal. I've added a little removable adhesive onto the back of my panel that has our pieces cut out already, and I'm going to pop that speech bubble die right in there, and it sort of fits in like a puzzle piece. I am going to tape it down. I don't want to be starting over and redoing those layers, so just to be sure, and then I'll run it through. I wasn't sure if it was going to cut all the way through the layer behind it, that pink layer, and so I could have glued my pattern paper on originally, but I didn't want to risk it, right? Again, I didn't want to have to hot foil again and then die cut the hole again, all those sorts of things. I'm just going to lift it up and add glue under those open spaces so I don't have to worry about trying to line up the hole for the sentiment again. And then I'll bring in my punch and notch out the pink layer as well. I am going to forget down the line to notch out the card base. I highly recommend you do that. In the end, you can still pull this out just fine, but it would have been easier if I did the card base as well. I'm lining up my sentiment and I'm drawing a line on the right-hand side where that needs to be. So I have a visual on the back, so I don't have to keep flipping it over. Then I'm going to pull it down to where I want the second sentiment to be at its lowest. I don't want this card to pull all the way out. I want it to stop all on its own. So I'll start by adding some 1mm foam on that far left side. This is from scrapbook.com, so it's super thin foam, but I'm trying to make sure that the backing paper stays on there because I want to go over that with my anti-static powder or some kind of powder so I can make sure that I'm not going to end up with this white paper or cardstock stuck in the adhesive. Then I need a little stopper. That's what this little piece is. It's just a scrap I had on my desk, and I'm marking where that stopper sticks out when it's at its lowest, so you'll see the top sentiment, and at its highest, so you see the bottom sentiment, okay? In the end, I could have just glued this on to begin with, but I was still sort of thinking through the logic of it. So I've peeled it off, I've added wet glue, and then I can just line up that stopper with the pencil marks that I made. So this is where it is when you pull it down and you're seeing that second sentiment. And I want to make sure that I am adding foam tape that's going to be a guide to make sure that when I'm pulling this down, it stays straight and right in line. And then I need to leave room for my stopper. So I need foam tape at the top so it doesn't accidentally get pushed and it's sticking out the top of the card. And I need it at the bottom so you can't pull those sentiments all the way out the bottom of the card. And so I'm just double checking everything seems to be fitting just fine. And then I will fill in the rest of the space, again with more 1mm foam tape. It comes in a 1/4 inch roll, a 1 inch wide roll, and then in an 1/8 inch wide strip. I've peeled off all that backing paper. I have this tucked into a right angle, which happens to be my scoreboard. And then I will just add my card base right on top of it. And I know I'm going to get it lined up perfectly the first time. So here I'm showing you I forgot to notch out the card base before I did that. It's okay. But if you remember, it's worth it. I have a second layer for my speech bubble. It's part of what I love so much about these dies because you can put in the die that we used to cut the hole originally, and then that sort of stitched detail die, and just run them through together and you get that beautiful outline. Then we have our little dog. I just popped him up on some foam, and we have that beautiful sort of rainbowy prism effect from our opal foil. Our sentiment drops down, and that finishes up technique number 2. For technique number 3, we're going to hide our sentiment behind our very fat hedgehog. You guys, he's so cute. He is so cute. This is the Hedge-Hugs die set. He comes with stamps too. And quite frankly, you could do this technique with almost anything. It wouldn't have to be a critter. He doesn't have to be skating. So again, use the technique and apply it to supplies you already have. This little guy has more pieces than some of the other die sets in this collection, but mostly you have options. I've decided to use all the options because when you have a cute critter, the more ridiculous you can dress them up and make them, the better. That's just my philosophy on paper animals. He has these little hands. I can just imagine like trying to put something in those hands, or having him hold like a little sign and use maybe one of my word dice to stretch between there. I did have to cut a scrap of black cardstock to put behind the eyes and the nose. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because there are so many other small dies in this set. I have done my skates out of silver and a pale pink, and the scarf right now is red, but I'm going to change my mind, right? Later when we actually make the card, I will switch it to that dark teal that we've been working with. When I sort of create with a collection of cards at the same time, I like to make them in similar colorways so my brain doesn't have to switch back and forth so much. And I'm not sitting there trying to figure out if all of these colors go together over and over again, because that's not something that is really a strong suit of mine. So this set has both a pair of earmuffs and a hat. And I was like, of course we're going to wear both. That sounds like me in the winter. I was born in Nebraska, you guys. It gets really cold here. I mostly try not to go outside in the winter, but if I do, I look like this guy. I have been eating everything I can find to build up my warmth reserves for the outside. I've got a hat, I've got earmuffs, I've got the biggest, fluffiest like scarf you've ever seen, and my coat is practically a sleeping bag. Let me know, how do you do with the cold? I do not well. I do not do well. So I am just sticking that scarf on there right underneath where I have his hands. He's so cute. I do like the red scarf, but anyway, we'll switch it later. Then I have some white shimmer cardstock. This stuff is from Michaels. I use it all the time. It's on, I don't know, 90% of the cards that I make. I do have to be really careful when I ink blend though, because it's a 65 pound. And so a really fluffy brush can help with that. I came in with some very pale pink ink at the top. And then I'm going to cut out a little pond that I can stencil. So I just sort of freehand drew that about the size that I need. I need the pond to be at least double the width of his body if he can move far enough to the side to reveal our sentiment, okay? And so then I started it with a hole punch, cut out the rest with my little detail scissors, and I'm going to come in with some dark teal ink. When I go to put everything away, I am going to put that little stencil in with my skating hedgehog, and then I'm ready to go for next time or the next time I need a pond. But I'll peel that off, and then we're going to start sort of putting everything together. I have a pink card base. This is just A2, and I wanted a little glitter around the outside, a little specialty something, but I need to die cut through both of these layers, and so I didn't want to put a cardstock back there where that could be trickier or cause problems. So I'm gluing my 2 layers together, and I wish I had used a different glue. Zip Dry or Beacon 3-in-1, a solvent-based adhesive, would have allowed for glue in more places without worrying about it drying too quickly and showing through the cardstock. I'm grabbing 1 die from the Emergency Card Essentials die set number 3. This is just a tiny, tiny, tiny little strip, right? It's going to cut that little slider track, but certainly you could just use a craft knife and create a little track as well. You don't need the die set to do that, but if I have it, it's easier. Then I'm going to hold my little hedgehog on there, get my placement right. I want his feet over the pond, and then I want the sentiment to hide behind the hedgehog So I just set it on top of him and picked it up with my door. Then I can go ahead and stamp my sentiment straight onto my card panel. This one says skating by with Christmas magic, and I just think it's really, really cute. I'm stamping it a couple of times and pressing lightly so that I don't squish the letters. It's a really fine detail font, and that seems to give me the best results. We're going to try something here at the bottom. I left it in just to show you what I did. It's very hard to see on camera, so we'll be brief about it. I wanted to differentiate the bottom, the snow and the icy pond from the top. And I wanted to create some extra texture down there. So I grabbed some white pigment ink. I just grabbed my Reinker and I'm going all the way around my pond with a paintbrush. That's going to stay sticky, and I am sprinkling on some Icicle's embossing powder. It is a clear powder that has some glitter in it. The glitter doesn't rub off because that powder sort of melts around it and holds it on there like it's sort of trapped in plastic. Here, as I'm adding heat, my white 65-pound cardstock peeled away ever so slightly from that pink layer in the background, and it's a little toasty. It looks a little bit like a marshmallow. I'm going to tell you right now. That's okay. No one knows. This piece is also from Emergency Card Essentials number 3, and I'm creating a Z on either side. So I made my U, and then I fold the other 2 pieces back like a Z. I'll add glue into the middle section, and then I fold the Z's down so I have 2 flaps sort of hanging out in the middle. I'm going to use my pokey tool and I'm going to curl those flaps. I'm breaking down the paper fibers and allowing the opportunity to create a little extra space in the middle. See how it looks like a book and there's a little bit of like a hole underneath where they meet up? You don't have to do that, but if you do, it's going to move better because it's got just a little gusset in there to create extra space. So I tucked those 2 flaps through our notched sliding track, and then I can just add glue and lay my little hedgehog down right on top of it so he is centered over top of our sentiment and he slides so beautifully. So that's technique number 2. Imagine if you had done that with an ornament, or if you had done that with some other sort of moving critter, right? Roller disco Dottie. Her body is the perfect shape for a stamped sentiment behind a dog. It would be so great. I added my panel onto my card base with foam tape, leaving room for that mechanism and the slider track. And then I was looking at it, and when the hedgehog is all the way on the left, it looks great. But when he's covering up the sentiment, it just felt really plain over there. And I'm terrible at clean and simple. Like it just doesn't, my brain doesn't know what to do with it. So I grabbed a very old die set that I don't think they make anymore, but I just grabbed a couple of snowflakes. If I can find it, I will link it below. And then I'm just going to layer 2 of them behind and 3 over sort of to the left. I am putting glue all over. Normally I'm like, yeah, a couple of dots. As long as it's like hanging on, we're good. But I didn't want to create catch points. In the end, I like that so much better. It's still pretty subtle. But we can slide our little hedgehog and it says skating by with Christmas magic. So those are my 3 techniques, but I do have a bonus technique for you. Did you know that you can stamp on glitter cardstock? We're about to do it. This is the Chimney Caper stamp and die set, and this one is just this ridiculous Santa getting stuck down a chimney. Honest to God, you guys, I have a die set kind of like this, like a Santa getting stuck in a chimney from a couple of companies at this point, and I don't care. I'm going to get all of them. I may just leave you like a link below that's like, hey, if you want to see them all, here they are. So I am just sort of layering things up really quickly. I think this one comes together almost as quickly as the penguins because it's so obvious to me where everything goes, right? It's Santa. It's really iconic. So I've put a little snow on top of my chimney. There is another die set that will cut like a snowy hill or snow for a rooftop so that you've got a place to put your chimney within your scene. And then it's just like our little boots. There's some little white furry trim that can go on top. If you don't like little pieces, I highly recommend the Sharpie acrylic markers. There's like a white acrylic marker that would work beautifully there. And then we have our little belt buckle. And that's it, right? We've got these sort of 2 pieces. I'm going to leave them separate for now. And then I'm going to do a little more foiling. I'm using this same Peppermint Twist Betterpress plate. And then this is the Silver Holographic Facets foil. You guys, it's going to turn out so beautifully. Spoiler. I actually foiled a bunch with this plate this day. If I have my machine out, I'm getting things hot. It's already hot in the craft room, right? We might as well go for it. But I just bought a bunch of the Color Wheel cardstock, and it's extra, extra smooth. Everything I foiled on the Spellbinders cardstock came out perfectly. So I am putting this into my MISTI. We're going to stamp our sentiment onto our glitter cardstock. And I have a little scrap of cardstock that I adhered temporarily to my MISTI sort of background piece, just so I would know where the bottom of the card is. I want to get this centered in the space that is left, but then I'll trim away the excess. That way, if I'm a little crooked or I'm not centered or something like that, I've got more room to play around with. I'm going to bring in StazOn Ink. This is a solvent-based ink. Think of it kind of like the Sharpie of ink pads. I'm going to stamp carefully. Okay, I'm not pressing down too hard. I'm going to use a pressure tool as soon as I can find mine. I'm going to stamp this 4 different times to build up the layers of color. It will bleed if you're not careful, right? If you press really hard, it bleeds a little bit. In the end, I am so pleased with how that turned out. I have used StazOn to stamp on all kinds of things, on acetate, on like a foil cardstock, but because of the texture, I wasn't sure about the glitter cardstock. I would say if you have a smoother glitter cardstock, some are smoother than others, that will work better. Really, that is the only thing holding this back for me, is that I've sort of a chunky glitter cardstock. I am lining up my little snowy rooftop here just so I know how far up to put that chimney. And I'll glue that down, and then I can add this piece on top of it. And I'm going to get it so I like where it looks below the chimney, and then I'll trim off the excess with my trimmer. It's worth noting StazOn comes in a rainbow of colors. There is a white StazOn that I think is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful for the holidays, especially on top of a shaker window. But I have it in purple, in navy, in all kinds of stuff. So just you're looking for the brand StazOn, StazOn. But that finishes up card number 4 and our bonus technique. My friends, I hope that this inspires you. Let me know which of these techniques you like the best, which ones you've tried before. Check out the description box below for a link back into the emergency card kit with the penguining to look a lot like Christmas, and for all the supplies that we've used today. Thank you all so much for spending your time with me, and I will see you next time.